Destiny 2 seasons like to cast away the old to make room for the new. I get why the developers do this. They want players to engage with the cool new toys, but if you're anything like me, sometimes you want to hold on to the old stuff, and thankfully, that's possible. For today's video, we're going to break down a hunter build that makes use of the Warmind cells that were introduced in the Season of the Worthy, and the Charged with Light mods that came in the Season of Dawn. Let's get started. I've seen a lot of people jump to the conclusion that builds in Destiny 2 aren't very complicated, and while I tend to agree with that notion, the difference in performance between a thoughtful build and a build that's been slapped together is night and day. For our setup today, we'll be using the Hunter's top branch, the Way of the Gunslinger, and the exotic gloves, Young Ahamkara's Spine. This exotic has the perk Wish Dragon's Teeth. It increases your trip mine's duration, radius, and reduces the cooldown of your trip mine whenever you deal ability damage. Each ability hit reduces the cooldown by 1/3. Against large enemies, you can see this exotic come alive. You throw out a trip mine, it explodes and refunds 1/3 of its cooldown. Then you use your proximity explosive knife melee ability. This is a ranged melee that hits twice, once on impact and a second time on detonation. Those 2 hits refund the remaining 2/3 of your trip mine. Throw another trip mine, Gambler's Dodge, throw another prox explosive knife, then reap the benefits of massive damage. Now it's time to add our mods into the mix. Wrath of Rasputin allows us to spawn Warmind cells on solar splash damage kills. Splash damage is essentially anything that deals area damage. Our trip mine grenade and the explosion from our proximity explosive knife both deal solar splash damage, which means we have 2 consistent tools for securing these kills. At a base level, the Warmind cells we spawn deal kinetic damage, but if we slot Rage of the Warmind, these cells will now deal solar splash damage. This means the explosions from our cells can potentially spawn more cells. Finally, we need to add some Charged with Light, but for this build, everything needs to be done with a bang. Incinerating Light is another Warmind cell mod. Killing enemies with the detonation of a cell will charge us with light, and for my charge spender, I'm using high energy fire. While charged, my weapons deal increased damage. Although I'll be doing most of my killing with explosions and Warmind cells, when I am shooting, I want my guns to hit a little bit harder, especially since I'm using a 7th Seraph weapon that also has a chance to spawn Warmind cells on kill. And there's the build. That's probably a lot of information. There's like 6 or 7 different wheels turning at the same time, but don't worry. We're gonna head into the field and break down the gameplay loop step by step. Alright folks, for today's testing we're diving into the Hollowed Layer Nightfall Strike in the classic Nightfall playlist. I don't like the Hollowed Layer that much, but there are a ridiculous amount of enemies for us to fight, so this is going to be a great opportunity to show off the destructive power of the Warmind cells, especially with the setup that we have. Now, the coolest part about our setup is the majority of the actions that we take are going to help us generate Warmind cells. So when I throw a grenade, when I use my melee, and when I kill things with my primary weapon, the 7th Seraph submachine gun, that is all going to help me generate Warmind cells. And even the explosion from Dragonfly is helping to produce those cells. Now that we've got one, I can walk over and detonate it and clear the field. It feels very good. And you'll notice I got another cell very quickly. I didn't mention this in a previous video, but Warmind cells spawn based on a kill tally system, and whenever I get a detonation, because I have Rage of the Warmind equipped, the kills that I get from my cell exploding are counting towards my next Warmind cell. So it's a very, very beautiful and functional system that I've got going here. It's a beautiful, beautiful system. So even when I get a detonation that's only going to kill one other enemy, that one extra kill is counting towards my next Warmind cell spawn. So I'm going to walk over here to trigger my prox knife, get some good splash damage on all those guys, make it a bit easier for me to take them down. I did spawn a cell, but something I've been trying to avoid is chasing after cells too relentlessly, because in the same way you don't want to push into situations that are not ideal for you when you're using a close range weapon, you don't want to chase after a Warmind cell that is in a suboptimal position. Alright, well that's convenient. We're moving into the first major arena of the Nightfall. We're going to have to deal with a spider tank and a buttload of enemies as soon as this thing depresses. But now that I have all of my abilities at my disposal, we can have a lot of fun. There is also a Warmind cell on the field, and I'm going to blow it up right as all of those enemies spawn, and I got a lot of kills from that. I can also set down my trip mine preemptively so that it deals with enemies that are coming out of spawning positions. I'm going to try and race over to the other side. Now you'll see my trip mine is at 1/3 of its cooldown. We get 2 hits with our throwing knife, and that is enough to refresh it. So now I'm in a position where I don't have my trip mine or my melee, so I do have to try and position myself to use Gambler's Dodge next to an enemy, but I don't want to force the issue too aggressively because that'll lead to my death. I don't necessarily want to walk up to a spider tank and use Gambler's Dodge. Or do I? Alright, we are almost done. We're almost at the final boss for the Nightfall already. I got a little bit stuck on the current section. It can be very frustrating, but we're moving right along, and we're getting Warmind cell spawns right away, and that feels really nice. So as more enemies continue to come in, I am going to continue trying to kill them with my 7th Seraph SMG as much as possible, and also my trip mine grenades. It's very nice that they are able to stick to enemies now because it makes it a lot easier to position them. You can use the stick basically the same way you would with the fusion grenade for the Warlock and the Titan. And there we go, that's going to do it for the testing. But before we close out completely, I want to talk more in depth about the different mods that I have in my armor. We'll start with the class item. I like to use 2 enhanced bomber mods whenever I'm using the young Ahamkara spine, because there are some instances where running up to an enemy to Gambler's Dodge to refresh your melee ability is not practical, and it's very tempting to do this because that is what gets you into your rotation. However, with 2 enhanced bombers in your class item, you can Gambler's Dodge from a distance and still get some cooldown reduction, so you can feel that you're getting more usage out of your grenades. Next up, I didn't talk much about Charged with the Light and how often it was proccing for me, but essentially every time I spawned a Warmind cell and blew it up, I killed enough enemies that I became Charged with Light, and then my gun did additional damage. This came into play a couple of times in the Hollowed Lair when I was fighting against the spider tank and some of the larger enemies, but also in the clips that we saw at the start of the video, there were many instances where I was fighting a larger mini boss or major enemy where I was charged with light and able to take advantage of the increased weapon damage from high energy fire. And that is about it. This was a very fun setup, and I was surprised to find that the effectiveness of it rivals Tyrant's Surge. Tyrant Surge is a genuinely overpowered mod, so there's nothing in the game that can compete with it, and honestly that feels kind of cheap and problematic, but it is nice to know that when Tyrant Surge is no longer available because of the seasonal artifact, there are going to be some powerful solar builds that you can use to rapidly spawn Warmind cells. Now the real question is it going to be feasible to work with a Warmind cell build without using solar explosions to increase the ease at which you can spawn these cells? Those are questions that we'll have to answer next time. So if you enjoyed this video and you'd like to support the channel more than you already do just by watching, liking, subscribing, and commenting, you can head over to patreon.com/iBluairJgR to become a patron. As always, the name of the game is Destiny 2, the name of the channel is iBluairJgR. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.